Killer Innovations Podcast for Monday, September 5th, 2005, show number 26, brought to you from Washington, D.C. Welcome to the Killer Innovations Podcast. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. Before we get started, please keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine alone and do not necessarily reflect those of my past, current, or future employers. Well, I'm off to Amsterdam in Italy this week. If you'll be in the area, let me know, and let's get together for a drink. Just as a heads up, this most likely will be a much shorter podcast than normal. It's a holiday weekend here in the States, and I'm currently hiding in my office to put this together. If my wife finds me, you will hear her dragging me out of the home studio, so we'll see how this goes. This past week, many of us have been glued to the TV sets watching the disaster unfold in the Gulf region of the U.S. near New Orleans. Many in the podcast community have created PSAs, or public service announcements, to help raise money. At the end of the podcast, I'll play the PSA I created for a charity organization that I'm personally involved with that is providing relief in Gulfport. If you have a podcast or access to other media outlets and can play the PSA, I would be most appreciative. Links to the PSA can be found on the Killer Innovations website. And as always, you can reach me at podcast@killerinnovations.com, or you can call the feedback line at 1-703-636-4460, or as always, you can Skype me at Phil_McKinney. Segment 1, we're going to talk about creating an innovation culture. One of the common questions I get in email is people or individuals or employees in large organizations or maybe a department or even in small businesses. And the challenge here is how do you start to move a culture towards being more innovative and more creative? Well, the challenge that I've come across, and I've seen this in both large organizations and small organizations, is that senior management is constantly dealing with trade-offs. Trade-offs that in many cases have some risk to them, or in some cases they're just change that management is not interested or cannot be compelled to take. So what are some of these trade-offs that management tend to get hung up on? Well, one off the bat that I've seen over and over again is this trade-off between what they perceive as maintaining efficiency versus fostering innovation. And why are they focusing on maintaining this efficiency? Well, one is they're looking for, want to maintain kind of this security, the comfort. Things are working well now, don't fix something that's not broken. And they're also looking to try to minimize distractions. Anything that's not in the day-to-day activity, they kind of view as distraction. Well, why does innovation have this perception of being something that does not help even maintain that efficiency? Well, one is from people who are not familiar with structured innovation processes, the whole area of creativity, they tend to view innovation as random. Basically management thinks that they have to go hire, 3 guys that go sit in a cube, feet up on the desk, and just sit there and think day in and day out. Or people that run around and just throw out ideas all the time, constantly causing chaos and confusion. So one of the things that has proven successful for me in getting management to recognize the benefit of innovation from the standpoint that it does not impact this, quote, efficiencies or minimizing the distractions, is to get those managers actively involved in the innovation process. Include them in a workshop that you're doing. Include them in a planning process or a planning activity that you're going through if you're responsible for innovation. Or if you're trying to create an organization, I've gotten some emails from listeners who are looking to want to create roles or responsibilities within their organization around innovation, around creativity. One is that you need to educate that management team To do that, one, have them listen to this podcast. Two, get the materials or expose them to other companies, preferably non-competitive, who have organizations such as this. You've heard Anand from Killer Innovations during an interview on this podcast talk about the work that he was doing at Pitney Bowes. Pitney Bowes has an organization that looks at innovation, looking at creativity, etc. So there are a lot of example companies out there that you can point management to look at companies that have been highly successful, highly profitable, have enjoyed the benefits of creating these innovative cultures that you can use as an example. Kind of the challenge, another challenge and trade-off that I see commonly with businesses is this issue of kind of this trade-off of stressing the bottom line without restricting innovation. And this bottom line is kind of the net result of the quarterly number challenge that public companies have. Private companies tend to not have that experience. I have some familiarity through a personal relationship about Bose Stereos. And you look at what Dr. Bose has done there as far as creating an innovative culture and in maintaining his ability to make significant long-term investments is because he's kept the company private. Bose is a private company. It does not have to answer to the quarterly number results. But think about it. Bose just recently announced a new suspension system for cars. It was written up in Popular Science 3 or 4 months ago. There's been a bunch of press covered on it. I've seen the video clips showing this new car suspension system. It is absolutely unbelievable. But Bose invested in that technology something like 20 years and $25 million. Name another company out there that can make those kinds of long-term, innovative investments and not be measured by the quarterly return. So part of this challenge of stressing bottom line without restricting innovation is clearly a challenge for the public companies. You've got to hit those quarterly numbers. It's just the reality of today's market conditions. However, we have to recognize that not all innovation is for long-term investments. You can have innovations that are aimed at having short-term impact on the quarterly results. So it's not always the case where innovation is, 2, 3, 4, 5 years out. It could simply be the fact that you're going to narrow the time frame of innovations that you're going to search for to have more near-term impact, more near-term results to the business. So, and the third kind of trade-off that many managers have to face is one is maintaining stability while adapting to the changing markets and environment. Lots of innovation gets spurred by the fact that there's change in the competitive environment, that there's change in the economic environment, cultural environments, whatever the case might be. And so management is looking for this trade-off of which trend or which change do I adopt to, do I run with as far as looking for innovations and looking for opportunities versus where is it that I am going to maintain the stability within my organization. In many cases, people or management will use maintaining stability really as another watchword for anti-change. We don't want to change, everything's working fine. Yes, there's this new competitive threat that's emerging, but we're going to focus on staying the course that we're at. And it also keep in mind that market rewards, meaning Wall Street investors, the investment community, private investors, institutional investors, reward stability and consistency. Businesses that constantly make random changes don't tend to get recognized or don't get rewarded. But at the same time, businesses have to recognize that standing still makes you a target. Particularly if you're a large business. If you stay the exact same course, your actions become predictable, your next steps become predictable, and new, young, innovative companies can then predict what you're going to do and out-innovate you, looking for things that are not on the normal path that you're looking towards. And the analogy that I have heard many times is that it's much easier to steer a moving car. If you're standing still, it's very hard to get momentum going to go one direction or another. And so therefore, if you're moving, at least if you're moving in some direction, it may not be the ultimate direction, but the ability to change that direction to go one way or another, depending on the market needs, is much easier to do once you are moving. And moving in this case meaning that you're receptive to change. You're receptive to do something different than you would normally do. Keep in mind that the challenge of getting a culture to change is, many cases, it's not just management, but it's also the thinking and the processes and the organizational structures that are within the corporate environment. And so in many cases, it requires really a long-term effort. It's not something that you can simply get the CEO to sign off and all of a sudden now you have an innovative culture. Changing the minds of management is key, but also changing the minds of the workers is just as important. And the need to constantly be in there, showing the benefit of innovation, showing the output, pointing to companies that have been successful. Eventually, people will change. People want to be creative, they want to be innovative, they want to contribute. In many cases, people will resist because they think that they are not creative or they are not innovative, and so therefore, if the corporate direction changes, they will be left out. And hopefully, you as the listeners of this podcast recognize that creativity and innovation is not a gift you're born with. Some people are just naturally more inclined to it, but it is a skill that can be taught. It's a skill that can be learned. It's a skill that can be practiced, and it's a skill that you can get better at. So part of changing the culture in the organization is helping the workers, management, everybody in the entire organization to recognize that being creative and being innovative is a natural skill that everybody has. They just need to be taught to how to unleash it and how to practice it. So in today's market segment, we're going to talk through an example of a thought leader who has helped both develop and apply killer innovations. Frank began his career as a bricklayer, and by age 27, had worked his way up through the profession to found his own engineering consulting company, Gilbreth Inc. He had a particular interest in the development of people to their fullest through potential training, work methods, improving the work environment and tools, as well as through the creation of a healthier working condition. And adherent to the principles of scientific management, Frank was one of the first to find practical applications for it. Now, Frank and Lillian met and were married in 1904. Lillian was an inspirational woman. It was what was very much a man's world at the time, particularly in the area of engineering consulting work, which she entered with Frank. Lillian achieved an astounding amount. When she completed a thesis on psychology of management, the University of California refused to award her a doctorate unless she returned to campus for a year's residency. This was impractical, so the family moved to the East Coast, where Lillian undertook a PhD in applied management at Brown University, writing a new thesis entitled Some Aspects of Eliminating Waste in Teaching. Her PhD was finally awarded in 1915. Lillian worked closely with Frank and Gilbreth Inc., as well as running their household and bringing up their children. Within a few days of Frank's death in 1924, she traveled to Europe to present a paper that he had intended to give at the International Management Conference in Prague. As Frank's widow, Lillian continued the work of Gilbreth Inc. by conducting seminars on motion study and accepting any consulting work that she was not barred from taking simply because she was a female. Often called the First Lady of Management, Lillian became the first woman member of both the Society of Industrial Engineers in 1921 and the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. And in 1995, Lillian Gilbreth was included in the National Women's Hall of Fame in the United States. Now, what are some of the contributions that Frank and Lillian made to management and engineering? Well, first off was Frank's focus on what was called work simplification. Work simplification was based on the respect for the dignity of people in work and was developed by Frank from the age of 17 when he began work as the bricklayer. He documented the different ways that individuals laid bricks and from these observations determined the most efficient way to perform this task. For Frank, efficiency was a benefit both to the employer through an increased number of bricks laid and to the employee through minimizing the levels of exertion required and so reducing tiredness and risk of injury. Through his extensive analysis, Frank pioneered a new system of laying bricks that increased output per worker from 1,000 to 2,700 bricks per day. And another application of Frank's efficiency studies can be seen in the operating rooms in hospitals around the world today. Prior to the efficiency study he conducted, surgeons would find all of the instruments they needed for operations for themselves, wasting precious minutes as the patient laid on the table. Frank introduced the procedure of having a nurse assist the surgeon by placing instruments in the open hand as they were required. Another thing that Frank invented was a thing called Thurbligs. In the study of hand movement, the Gilberts found that terms such as move hand were too general to allow detailed analysis. They split hand movements into 17 basic units of motion that could then be, through various combinations, form the hand movements being monitored. These units were known collectively as Thurbligs, Gilbert spelled backwards with the TH transposed. Another area that they innovated was in the micronomer. In the course of their motion study, the Gilberts used photographs to record and then analyze workers' movements. To aid in the clear analysis of their films, they developed the micronomer, a clock that would record time in 1/2000th of a second, which was placed in the area of being photographed, and this device is still used today. And around the time that the Gilberts began working, Henry Gantt developed the idea that grew into what came to be known as Gantt charts, a system for recording the planning and controlling of work in progress. Frank and Lillian used the Gantt chart in their work and in their turn added process charts and flow diagrams. And these new tools graphically demonstrated the constituent parts that were needed to be formed to complete the task. So keep in mind, we all use Gantt charts in our day-to-day planning activities, and with process charts and flow diagrams, we can thank Frank and Lillian for their contribution. Also, one area that, particularly in Lillian's case, was around the psychology of management and personal issues. The importance of the employee welfare was reflected through the work of both Gilberts, ranging from Frank's concern over the minimization of employee fatigue and stress to their mutual interest in incentives, promotion, and employee welfare. Although not the originator of the discipline of industrial psychology, Lillian's research for her doctoral thesis raised awareness of the importance of the human element in industry. Many publishers refused to publish a book by a woman on such a technical subject, but Psychology in the Workplace was eventually published in installments by the Society of Industrial Engineers in 1912 and 1913. The Gilberts' interest in industrial psychology continued throughout their lives and was demonstrated by Lillian's participation in various U.S. government committees on subjects ranging from unemployment and war production to problems related to aging and disability. The Gilberts are largely unknown and uncelebrated in today's modern corporate world, which tend to minimize the importance of measurements minutiae and favors the space and thinking time needed for creativity and innovation. And in my case, in my belief, I don't think the two are really separate. I think both creativity, innovation, and the importance of how work is done is critically important. Now, the Gilberts are probably most famous for one thing, and it's not related to their management work. What they're probably most famous for was the fact that they had 12 children, 6 girls, 6 boys. The story of their family life was recounted in a book called Cheaper by the Dozen, which has been used as the basis for 4 major motion pictures. Starting with themselves, there is a black and white version of the Gilbert story, but probably one of the more famous ones is a movie called Yours, Mine, and Ours, starring Lucille Ball. Now, Frank apparently informed Lillian that he wanted 6 sons and 6 daughters. And in an interview with the New York Post in 1941, Lillian was quoted as having once asked him, "How on earth can anybody have 12 children and continue a career?" To which Frank replied, "We teach management, so we'll have to practice it." Now, Frank took his efficiency systems pretty seriously, even at home. In his book, Cheaper by the Dozen, it is stated that he used 2 shaving brushes to lather his face in order to save 17 seconds on his shaving time. He abandoned attempts to shave with 2 razors, however. While it saved 44 seconds in shaving time, he also had to spend an extra 2 minutes bandaging his cuts. Now, neither were the Gilbreths children exempt from their parents' efficiency methods. They were all given their own tasks and became individually responsible for duties, such as buying the family's birthday presents or being chairperson of the House Budget Committee. Now, some of the innovations that I think the Gilbreths do bring and have brought to us is really this whole area of visual discovery. The Gilbreths were big on taking and making films of the study areas in order to derive what could be the process savings. Now, we've talked in previous podcasts about using videography to record and monitor or observe users using technology or doing things in the day-to-day tasks in order to derive an area of innovation, a new product, a new feature, whatever the case might be. In this case, the Gilbreths used, back in that time, film in order to identify wasted steps or ways to improve the efficiencies of the processes that were being used by both hospitals, businesses, government, wherever the case might be. So I think the Gilbreths are an excellent example of using this kind of visual videography. If you haven't seen the original black and white movie version of Cheaper by the Dozen, I would encourage you to go rent it, go buy it, watch it. It's very funny. It's also very insightful in the family life when you've got parents that are so tight and so focused on time efficiencies, which is what the Gilbreths research areas were in. Moving on to segment 3, the killer question of the week. Now, the Gilbreths showed that innovation is not just about technology or inventing something new and tangible, something that you can hold in your hand, but it can also be applied to process. Now, in the 1990s, we tend to overuse the term of business process reengineering. But what I'm suggesting is that there are true innovations that can be discovered around processes. It's not just limited to changing the process, but finding entirely new ways that can create a killer innovation and create a very unique competitive advantage. So this week's killer question is, what technology could I use to remove a previously required step? Again, what technology could I use to remove a previously required step? Now, in many cases, once processes are defined, they become very difficult to change, much less eliminate. In one industry that I'm very familiar with, telecommunication, the process steps to complete an order for a new phone line has been the same since the dawn of the industry. And trying to inject change in the industry is a slow and painful process. Do you know all the process steps required to deliver the product or service? There's 2 ways to look at that. What are your processes for your own product or service? And what are the processes that your competitors use in order to build and deliver their product and service? And what steps could you automate? What technologies could you apply to eliminate steps that could give you that competitive advantage against your number 1 competitor in the market? Or if you're not currently a competitor and you're entering a new market, look at the companies who are already established. What are their processes? How do they go about building and delivering the product or service? And what is it that you can either eliminate by technology or even process reengineer in order to create a competitive advantage? Particularly if you can identify some process steps that you can apply that would be extremely difficult for your competitor to change or eliminate. So again, this week's killer question is, What technology could I use to remove a previously required step? And with that, thanks for listening. Looks like we're going to get an entire podcast in here, and I'm not going to get dragged out of the studio. Thanks for listening. Please keep the feedback coming. Drop me an email, podcast@killerinnovations.com. Let me know that you're listening. Give me some background on your day-to-day job, and ask questions. I just recently got a fairly lengthy email from a student who is just starting college in an industrial engineering area who was interested in getting some thoughts on some ideas that he was developing. So feel free to send me emails, and I'll try to be diligent about responding. Also, you can leave me a voicemail at 703-636-4460. Now, last week I played excerpts from the podcast or from the voicemail feedback line. I'd love to be able to play more, but there weren't any left this week. So again, please call the voicemail feedback line. Leave me your comments about the show. Leave questions, whatever the case might be. 703-636-4460. Or you can Skype me at Phil_McKinney. It's the start of a new month, so voting for your favorite podcast restarts. One of the questions I get is, why do we ask for votes? Well, the votes and comments on Podcast Alley are the easiest way to say thanks for the time and effort that goes into researching and producing your favorite podcasts. I know in most podcasts that I produce for this show, it takes me anywhere from 4 to 7 hours of research and prep time in order to pull together the material for the 30-minute podcast. We don't do it for the money. We do it because we have a passion for the subject and a passion to share that information with you, the listeners. So again, posting your comments and voting on Podcast Alley is the easiest way for you just to say thanks to the producers of your favorite podcast. And vote for all of your favorite podcasts. In August, based on your votes, Killer Innovations was ranked number 2 for business podcasts. It's the highest ranking that we've achieved since we started the podcast 5 months ago. And again, I want to thank you for your support. So please visit Podcast Alley and vote. Please join in on the conversation about creativity, innovation, ideas, and weak signals by visiting thekillerinnovations.com and clicking on the KI Community button. The KI Community is a bulletin board system that allows you, the listeners, to both interact with each other and to post questions and thoughts, and also links to other interesting articles that you may have come across around the areas of creativity and innovation. The Killer Innovations Podcast is a proud member of the Tech Podcast Network. If it's tech, it's here. Visit techpodcasts.com to discover the best in technology podcast. And remember, at the end of the podcast, I'll be playing the public service announcement for the disaster relief effort. So stay subscribed, get others to subscribe. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Hello. This is Phil McKinney of the Killer Innovations Podcast. Hurricane Katrina has forever changed the lives of individuals and families who found themselves in its path, along with all of us who witnessed the disaster on our TVs, radios, and via the web. The loss of human life and the total destruction of homes and entire cities has never before been experienced in our lifetime. The needs of the survivors along the Gulf Coast are enormous, requiring the efforts of many organizations and charities. One charity that I'm supporting is Christ in Action. Christ in Action has responded to the calls from federal, state, local, and international governments and organizations to provide disaster relief ranging from Hurricane Floyd, the 9/11 bombings at the Pentagon and Ground Zero in New York City, and most recently, rebuilding the orphanages that were destroyed by the tsunami in Sri Lanka. In response to Katrina, Christ in Action left Washington, D.C. with their tractor trailers full of tents, food, water, and a full cook kitchen immediately after the hurricane hit. And within 48 hours, they were operational and are serving the only hot meals available to the residents of Gulfport. I would ask that you consider supporting Christ in Action's relief efforts by making a donation of money, your time by volunteering to work in the disaster area, and your frequent flyer miles. By donating your frequent flyer miles, you help get a volunteer to the area while making sure that 100% of the cash contributions goes to the relief effort. For more information, please visit their website at christinaction.com or call 703-368-6286. And remember, time is of the essence.